President Trump pausing additional strikes against Iran for a third straight day. Diplomatic efforts ramping up after nearly 2 weeks of fighting. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is set to meet with President Trump at the White House tomorrow as both leaders weigh what it will take to end the conflict. Netanyahu speaking with Maria on Sunday. Here's what he wants to see. Watch.
What will it take to end this war?
What will it take? It will take for Iran to understand, either for this regime to fall or for Iran to realize that the cost of wreaking economic chaos to the world, murdering its thousands of its own citizens, and shooting at everyone. This is what this regime is doing when they don't have nuclear weapons. So imagine what they would do if they had nuclear weapons. I think when this regime is either toppled or it's sufficiently weakened that it knows it has to end its nuclear program and has to change its course. But one way or the other, they have to end their nuclear program. And with a deal or without a deal, that has to come to an end.
Joining me now, Heritage Foundation Center for National Security, Brent Sadler. Brent, good morning. Where does this stand right now with this conflict? Because, Netanyahu said the goal is ultimately preventing Iran from rebuilding the nuclear program. From a military standpoint, how difficult is it to permanently degrade that capability? And which sites should we be targeting?
Well, there's nothing permanent in the world. It will only be, I guess, a lasting peace is if the nature, I'm not saying regime change, but the nature of the regime in Tehran changes from a murderous, terroristic one to one that's willing to live peacefully with its neighbors, to include the United States and as well Israel. And so far, they're unreformed in that matter. So everything we get in the interim is going to be temporary. It could be years, could be months, but most likely, given the state of damage that's already been done, we're talking years for a substantial recovery. But there's really three objectives. One, of course, top of the list, Iran not getting a nuclear weapon, which it's going to require vigilance for a very long time to ensure the enforcement. Two, to secure the Straits of Hormuz. I mean, the Iranians have been irresponsible, on their side of the Straits, attacking innocent, neutral shipping against all standards of behavior. And then finally, that lasting peace notion that changed the nature of the regime, which that's a longer and that's a process that the Iranian people are responsible for. President Trump and President Netanyahu have just simply given the opportunity for that.
So, Brent, I want to get your reaction to this. There's a report this morning in the Wall Street Journal that the U.S. has held off on this major military campaign. They're concerned about munitions and dwindling stockpiles, despite the fact that the Secretary of War said that's not the issue. Here's what they write. I want to get your reactions. The White House has been informed of these declining inventories of air defense interceptors by General Dan Kane. There's a concern from Kane that the low inventories do not preclude a resumption of major combat operations against Iran. It adds to the risk. So basically, that, in a nutshell, that the general is worried about risk to American lives.
Well, I mean, it's no secret going back all the way to 2012 when the briefings by the combatant commanders was not classified that we had a munitions problem. Now, that's not to say we don't have enough munitions for the fight that we're in right now with the Iranians, but we're not in a comfortable place, which means you take on risk. And so that's the cuteness of those words that you hear from the Pentagon about, well, we can still achieve the mission, but there's heightened risk. And it's not having enough munitions for the unknown or the unexpected, that black swan. But they know what they need. Congress and as well the executive branch for far too long have not been able to make the investments for well over a decade to grow the production capacity. And we're starting to see the reality of that. But again, I'm very skeptical of leaked reports or reporting because there's far more to the picture than what's being reported in the open.
Okay. Let me ask you about Ukraine, because Ukraine's accusing Russia of providing intelligence support to Iran. That includes satellite imagery of U.S. military positions. Tehran is warning Kyiv a reported strike on an Iranian vessel in the Caspian Sea cannot go unanswered. And then Ukrainian President Zelensky says that Russia is looking to expand their partnership with North Korea, bringing in thousands more troops, Brent. So, it's almost like we have separate, conflicts going on, but it seems to be merging on several fronts. Your reaction?
Well, first off, the notion that we're at risk of expanding this war to a regional one. Well, the Iranians have already done that when they decided to attack all of their neighbors. So they've escalated, and I think the Ukrainians are rightfully going after the shipping and the resupply between Russia and Iran. And that's, I think, a remarkable thing that the Iranians now have to deal with on their side of the equation, the potential for horizontal escalation. The Gulf nations have already entered into the attack. There's been reports of that in the past in response to attacks from Iran. So I think it's, to be expected, and I think it adds pressure onto the Iranians. There's a lot more of a coalition of the willing, so to speak, that are starting to close in on Iran.
So we've got our allies, which of course is Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, and then Ukrainian President Zelensky. So those two partnerships for the United States could be a benefit.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's bigger than that. If you add in Kuwait, Bahrain, where the Fifth Fleet headquarters is at, UAE, Saudi Arabia, all those countries have also been hosts to the United States and actively involved in defense of the bases and the U.S. forces there, and also share in common cause and a common threat of Iran.
Interesting. Let me ask you about China, because Beijing reportedly is backing efforts to restart these U.S.-Iran talks through Pakistan and then increasing investments in energy, tech, infrastructure. The United States and China are moving into these advanced technologies like autonomous systems. But this raises questions about the next phase of global power competition, Brent.
Yeah.
And then you also heard President Trump saying that he doesn't want China involved in, peace negotiations with the Iranians. I mean, there's a lot of layers here in that, but your reaction?
Yeah, China is also behind the, continuing and sustaining the war that Putin is waging in Ukraine right now. Certainly didn't put up a red light to keep the North Koreans from sending troops into to prolong that war. And much the same way, it's to China's benefit to continue to try to bleed or distract from its front door in Taiwan, any potential conflict there, to try to kind of bleed the potential adversaries. The United States top of the list. So it's in their interest to prolong these conflicts. I would not see any good benefit by including the Chinese. And again, the pressure and scrutiny needs to be constantly applied to make sure they don't provide military assistance to Iran. Despite what they say, it takes eyes on the ground to see what they really are doing.
Well, are they an ally or an adversary? And all of this as Xi Jinping is set to visit the United States in September. Well, a lot to watch. Brent Sadler, you're a critical voice on this. Thank you for being with me.
Thank you.
All right, we'll be right back.